Hello and welcome to the CivilTalk Podcast. I'm your host, Tapasio Althouse. If you're new to the show, this is where we explore civility and social emotional learning with esteemed guests, expert insights, and practical advice to help people navigate the world. Today, we have a very special episode as we welcome our first ever mayor to the show, Jeff Caggiano, the current mayor of Bristol, Connecticut. Jeff brings a wealth of experience, not only in public service, but also in leadership roles within the pharma and biotech industries, where he has spent over 30 years. His unique background in sales, training, and leadership development has given him a diverse perspective on teamwork, change management, and innovation, skills that are vital in his current role as mayor. In this episode, we will dive into how social emotional learning and civility play a role in leadership within local government. We are so excited to explore these topics with Mayor Caggiano and hear how his diverse background informs his approach to leading with empathy and compassion. Jeff, we're thrilled to have you here today. Welcome to the show.
Thank you very much for having me. I'm excited. This is going to be fun.
Yeah, I think so as well. So to start us off, I'd love to hear more about your journey from working in the pharma and biotech industry to becoming the mayor of Bristol. What inspired you to make that transition into public service?
Yeah, I think it's actually very unique. Not too many people choose a very divergent path 32 years into a career. I was doing very well in that career, but I think COVID also pushed me in that direction to answer that part of the question first. So the career went from something where I had a lot of face-to-face dialogue with people, was able to travel and make connections with people, to a world that was Zoom, Microsoft Teams driven. And I don't do well in that world. By the way, maybe we'll get into this conversation, but I don't think that the average person does as well in that world as they would in the face-to-face world. So, I was in the pharma biotech industry for 32 years. As you said, a lot of my work was in person-to-person interaction live. So a lot of sales. I also did have a pretty unique experience that really helped me understand emotional intelligence and social hierarchies and how we deal with people. And that I had a year and a half stint that I was a leadership development trainer for a company that actually was suffering some pretty significant losses and had to rethink leadership. Things came easy when you have a couple $1 billion drugs doing extremely well, and then all of a sudden those go generic. So that was a very interesting time for me, and I was able to learn from that experience how we want to treat other people with great respect and understand what drives people's motivations and behaviors. I think a lot of the sales background and experience has been very helpful for me in that as well, transitioning into the political sphere.
Yeah. Have you always been based out of Connecticut and Bristol, or did you change geography to become, and you've been reelected, right?
Yes. So I was elected in 2021, just post the COVID pandemic, which was really kind of how I got this start, right? Because my career was interrupted a little bit, and we didn't have somebody to run for mayor, and I was behind the scenes somebody who was very interested in politics. A good friend of mine ran for state senate. I love the analytical part of it and the strategy and all of that, so I helped him. So anyway, I was elected in 2021. I was reelected in 2023, and certainly have learned a lot in those 3 years being mayor.
Yeah, I want to dive into that. I mean, that's a really interesting transition. And the first question, hard-hitting question that pops into my head what were some things you were not expecting? What skills did not transfer over from the biotech and the pharma industries over into, being a public servant? Like, what kind of took you off guard as far as the social aspect, social emotional learning, or even civility aspect, or just the vocation in itself?
Yeah, it's very interesting because 3 years into it now, there was a little honeymoon phase, right? I'm a new mayor, and I know a lot of people in town. I've always been. You asked that question earlier too. I've always been kind of Bristol based, even though in the pharma biotech world, I covered lots of expansive areas, actually the whole country at one point. So I did a lot of travel. So I know a lot of people in town. But I was to your question on what is different that I didn't expect. I didn't expect people to rely on government to solve their problems to the degree that they do now, right? I mean, literally, we get calls in the office every day. But by the way, the first calls, we got elected in November. So December, we had our first snowstorm just weeks after I was inaugurated. And we literally had two different people call. One said, there's only an inch of snow on the ground. Why are the plows plowing my street? You're wasting taxpayer dollars. The next call comes in and says, my street has an inch and a half of snow on it, and the snowplows haven't been here. What's going on? So, when you have a society that is expecting immediate fixes and they're looking to other people to solve their problems on even some cases mundane situations, that was a surprise to me. Again, remember, I was in sales for 32 years. So the other part of the surprise is probably more in line with a lot of the things that you all are talking about and trying to teach, especially young people in the UConn system and other places, is that the level of decorum and kindness and respect dropped off pretty quickly. As a salesperson, I had to be nice to everybody, right? As a salesperson, you have to treat everybody with respect because you never know who your next client is going to be. But in the political world, some people come at you pretty hot and heavy, and they have very little respect for elected officials to begin with.
Right. I mean, that's a huge factor in being a mayor, and especially in sales as well. It's not something that you find. I mean, in a lot of job vocations, when you think of a barista, someone, you don't get their order right, and that happens. But how do you, as a mayor and as a spokesperson for Bristol, deal with that? You're constantly engaging with the public, making decisions that impact your constituents. How do you use SEL, social emotional learning, and the tenets of civility to manage those conflicts and encourage a more sort of civil dialogue in public discussions? What do you do? What are your tactics?
Yeah, I think my biggest tactics, to put it very plainly, and then maybe I'll explain a little story on it as well too, is that I treat everybody as if they were somebody that I was trying to sell my latest valuable service to. And so I was biotech industry. We had a great blood test at the end that was going to detect cancers in blood before any x-ray would pick it up. So that's cool technology. That's something that anybody with cancer would be very interested in. And you come across to everybody, whether you like them or not, as, hey, I'm going to listen to you, and we're going to have a good conversation here. And I guess you take that over into the political realm. The one thing I'm pretty proud of in the last 3 years is that I know I have diehard political opponents, right? They'll take a position that is the direct opposite of what my upbringing has been or my thought process. But I try to listen to everybody. And I think that's a real big key in no matter what business you're in, but really, really important in politics. Because if you can sit down and have a conversation with somebody, listen to them, and really not try to have your automatic canned response, which a lot of politics is, right? You go, you're either going to be progressive or you're going to be conservative, and there isn't much in the middle. And quite honestly, most people in this country are in the middle. They're unaffiliated. They don't get involved with politics because they don't want to get into this harsh dialogue. So I think, just listening to other people's point of view, not formulating questions in the middle of it or trying to gear people towards your thought process is very helpful.
Do you have any? It's sort of like build it and they will come. You know what I mean? Like build your own thought process, and those who sort of align with your thought processes will navigate towards you. You mentioned you had a scenario. Is there like specific scenario that comes out into your head that you're like, okay, I really had to battle in this and keep my cool,
Yeah, so early on in my career, we had an unfortunate circumstance, which happens in many towns and cities. We had an activist group come in that was a racial group that was really anti-Semitic, but they also were, against the African American population, and they were throwing flyers out in the neighborhood, one small neighborhood in the city, and that flyer was actually incidentally detected by our public works department. They were out doing street sweeping. They picked it up and they called me and said, Mayor, this is not good. We have a flyer that is encouraging people to join this group. The group was actually out of Boston, so it wasn't even a local person, but still very disturbing information. And we kind of chose to not highlight this group, right? Because the last thing that we want to do is promote hate and racial intolerance. And I kind of got beat up for that because somebody did find the flyer. So it wasn't just incidentally caught. We had some people that found it. Some young activists who got very emotional about it and thought the mayor didn't do enough. Now, I denounced it right away. I said, there's no room for hate. Bristol's called the all heart city. I said, we're an all heart city. We accept everybody. And I put out, regular statements. This activist group got more and more involved and they started to protest. They came to our city council meeting, chanting, and really were uncivil. It was a little disturbing to maybe some of their people that might have had some of the same political philosophy, but it actually turned people to say, wait a second, this isn't how you treat people. So not only did we listen to them and engage in an active one-on-one dialogue, but I think one of my better success stories that's kind of cool on this is one of the younger ladies who is a very strong advocate and an activist, was talking a lot on Facebook, and we do a lot in our social media. We'll talk more about that later. But I reached out to her in a private message and said, you're putting a lot of this information out. I understand that you're struggling with this. Let's get together and meet for coffee. And she took me up on it. So not many people do, but I was very pleased that she did. Turns out that she had a pretty close relationship with my son. They're basically the same age. They were in the same school together. And what really calmed her down, which is, I think, a cool story, is, oh my God, I didn't know that was your son. He's a great kid. I won't use his name here. He's awesome. He's so nice to everybody. He listens to everybody. And what a great kid. I would never guess that he was your son. And I looked at her and I said, well, he is my son. I don't think the apple falls that far from the tree. So we need to treat everybody with respect. And, to this day, I have not heard any more from that individual, and that activist group is somewhat satisfied. I mean, we can't stop everything. Racism is something that will exist. But I think the problem they were trying to create was maybe bigger in reality than it was. And I think the understanding that we got with a one-on-one live, if it happened to be a lunch conversation in that case, was invaluable. And as politicians, you can't do that every day. You can't do that with everybody. There's 60,000 people that live here in Bristol. But I think in certain circumstances, that live one-on-one conversation is great.
That's a huge lesson. We talk a lot about trolling on the Civil Talk forum, and it's so much easier to engage in vitriol when you have a screen in the front of you, as opposed to sort of like vis-a-vis conversations. It would be amazing if you could have a one-on-one lunch conversation with every single person in Bristol. I think empathy and compassion is so heartfelt, and if everyone can feel it, one would realize that there are more similarities between opposing parties than not. With that being said, how do you manage online discourse? I know that was a topic that came up when we had a discussion a few weeks ago.
Yep.
In preparation for this, but how do you manage that,
So very quick general rule, and we will always have, 5 or 10% of the people, maybe even less, that are what you call the trolls, the keyboard warriors, that will, no matter what I post, it could be, I had a little kid dancing at the parade the other day, and it was the funniest, coolest little video. By the way, no negative comments on it yet, but I guarantee you there'll be a negative comment coming out of it, because that's just what people like to do. I really don't respond to 95% of those. And if I were to respond, my response is something that's very calculated and trying to give them a outlet that they can get more information, right? So it's from an educational standpoint. If somebody says, you're a horrible mayor, you did this, and they're attacking me personally, I take the personal part out of it and just say, hey, there's a waste to energy plant around the corner here that people don't like. It's been here for 30 years and they just didn't really know it was here. So I will just give them the information about the plant. This has been here for 30 years. If you want to learn more information, you might want to go to this link if I respond. But most of the time I'm actually just letting people vent and not trying to escalate the conversation. It's a de-escalation. And we do a lot of that in the office as well as people call in. But a lot less people call these days now, and more of them are on social media complaining. And we just try to direct them.
Right. How do you manage, curious question, how do you manage your staff as far as you seem to have a really good grasp on, self-awareness and keeping that composure. And that's really 85 to 90% of your job is keeping that composure. How do you manage your staff and make sure that they kind of follow suit in that regard, because they are representatives of you, how do you manage that aspect?
So every city and town is different, and there are selectmen, there's mayors in Connecticut. Some have staffs of 10 or 12. I'm pretty lucky. I have a staff of 1. And we have worked very closely together. So my admin, Kirsten, who set this appointment up with us, probably is great. But even early on, she would get calls, and right away she'd kind of get sucked into this. Well, the city's got to fix this. The city's got to do this. And I always remind her there's 2 sides to every issue, and there are always 2 stories. So we need to listen to people with that empathy, understand where they're coming from, and then try to meet them halfway. And by the way, she naturally is good at it. Some people are really good at the emotional intelligence stuff and can de-escalate a situation. She's great because we handle those stressful situations very differently. I'm a relatively calm person, and I don't like to engage and fight. I've never been a fighter. And she isn't either, but she will use a lot of humor, which I don't use much, but that's her technique to, be jovial and have fun with people. Another quick story for her is we had a lady come in, and we have an ordinance that says starting on November 15th, you can't park your car on the city street. And from November 15th to March 15th, there's a parking ban. If you park your car on the street, you're going to get a $25 fine. And the lady was irate. We've been doing this for 30 years, by the way. So the ordinance hasn't changed, but it just is there. And she was irate. And at the end, my admin said to her, hey, wouldn't it just be cheaper if you just paid the $25 fine now? You're going to have to get, legal counsel involved, whatever. You're going to have to go to meetings. You're going to have to get out of work. And, joked with her, here's $25. I'll give you the money right now. And it calmed her down. And she left not satisfied, but at least heard. And I think that's an important thing, too.
Right. Yeah, that's a good point. And for people who don't have the luxury of having their Kirstens, or having a larger staff, or, or having a background in sales as you do, what advice would you give to other people who are trying to get into a role of position as like mayor? What sort of things can they do in their lives that can help with that?
Yeah, this goes back to George Washington, by the way. One of the key things that he always said was that every civil servant should live their life first, have great life experiences, come and serve the public for the right reasons, right? Not about you, but about giving back and doing the right thing. And then get out before you're asked to get out. So most people don't have term limits in mayoral offices. Congress doesn't have term limits. But if you ask 90% of Americans, they would say there should be term limits. Presidents have it, obviously. By the way, as a mayor here in Bristol, I love it. We're one of 5 towns in the city in the state of Connecticut. We're the only city that actually has a term limit. Oh, wow. So I think that's a good thing. But it gets back to the point to what you were talking about, is that I think you have to have that frame of reference. If you want to serve the public, you have to understand that every decision you make, there'll be 10 or 15% of people that will be 100% opposed to it. But maybe look at it from the other standpoint. 85 to 90% of people will be fine with what you do. So you kind of have to block out the negative energy. You have to have a very thick skin. You have to be doing this for whatever reason that drives you to do that, and just move forward. And again, back to my link, so I talk a little bit more about how my previous career helped me with this, is that I actually served, I'd say 20 of my 30 plus years in the cancer side of the business. So pharmaceuticals and tests that literally help patients with cancer, many of which who had a death sentence. Wow. And, cancer is a very scary thing. And it was very gratifying to be, although I wasn't having direct conversations with lots of patients, I understood where they were coming from. Friends and family would ask for advice, and that knowledge and being able to connect with people on a way where you're truly giving back and extending and enhancing their life is a good life lesson. And that's what you want to do as a politician. You're not going to be able to help everybody. By the way, it is a big thing of mine. I am much more that government is not the solution to your problem. It's an old Ronald Reagan quote, by the way, which might be before your time, Tapasio. But I do remember him saying that if the government comes knocking on your door and says, hey, we're here to help, you might want to consider slamming the door in their face and go take care of yourself. That's a Reagan quote. But I kind of like that mentality from the standpoint of what is my job as the city mayor. I have kind of lanes that I need to stay in within city government. And, people are coming at me from all directions. But if I can kindly say to them, hey, I hear you. I understand what your problem and your issue is here. But that's actually taken care of on the federal level. Can I connect you with the congressman's office? And maybe they can help you, rather than, lash back out them and say, hey, you don't know what you're talking about. I can't help with that. You have to have some patience for sure.
I mean, a huge part of politics too seems to also, having to relay to the public, like that's out of my control. I don't have any authority over that. And so I can guide you over here. And it's really sort of TAing a lot of your public,
Yeah.
So what do you think is the future of your position? Looking to the future, how do you see the role of civility and social emotional learning evolving in local governance? What steps do you think leaders should take to ensure that the values that you have are integrated into that public service? It's 2024, and with the advent of social media and TikTok, there's just so much information flying at your, into your brain. Kids today are so much different than they were 15, 20 years ago. How do you see that impacting the future of governance?
Yeah, well, I hope I have an impact on that, to be honest. And one of the things that I really have done is I've taken the social media aspect and not made it so what I'll call political, and this is more lowercase p, not party political, but putting out issues that are just information based. Hey, by the way, we're flushing your fire hydrants in this area, and your water is going to be off from 7 to 3 today. People, in the past, if we didn't use social media to do that, 90% of people wouldn't know that. And somebody's got to be in work at 9 o'clock, and they get up at 7:30 to take a shower, and their shower doesn't work. Imagine how upset they are. And we are cutting a lot of that off at the pass because we're using the platform as an educational platform for people. We're not using it to say, here's what I think about this very controversial topic, right? And we have topics from, think about this too, as mayor, gun control to abortion to social services, homelessness. Guess what? Not one of those things the mayor makes decisions about. Those are state and federal laws and governance. And I think a lot of local mayors like to jump on those bandwagons because everybody pays attention to the national spectrum. And here's a great little factoid that I do want to talk about as well, too. So this year is a presidential election year, 2024. We will have in the neighborhood, and this is just Bristol, so I know my little demographics, but these numbers are probably very similar no matter what city or town you live in. They'll be in the range of 80 to 85% of the registered voter population that will go out and vote. And by the way, there's a good 10 or 15% of people that never even register to vote. But of that population, they go out to vote. They vote for an electoral college vote based on two people. And I will say this publicly, that most people this year don't think are the best candidates that we could put forward. I don't care what party you're talking about. And they will have huge debates with family, friends, with neighbors on who's right, who's wrong. They'll never, ever meet these people. I do this when I go to schools. I ask the kids, hey, have you or your parents ever met the president of the United States, former, current, whatever? One person might raise their hand. Oh, my mom met this president. They walked by. I met President Clinton when I was in college. He actually came to our school to speak. It was before he was president. He was the Arkansas governor. I didn't really meet him. I said hi to him. That was it, in a big crowd. But then I asked, how many of you have met a mayor? And I get every kid in the class to raise their hand, because they don't raise it first. But I said, I'm the mayor. You can sit here and talk to me. You were 20-1. You can ask me any question you want. And what we need to do is make that focus and that shift backwards. So in local elections, now let's switch to the 25-year election coming up, or 23 or 21 when I won my elections. About a third of the population consistently shows up to vote for local mayors, selectmen, boards of ed, other people in their community. These are their neighbors, and only a third show up to vote for that. And I think if we switched back to a truth, right? They say all politics is local, but that's not what the media pushes. That's not what you see on social media. That's not what you see on the news anymore. By the way, is the news really news? Most of the news now comes out as editorials. And I think all of that drive to heighten people's awareness to issues that are way out of their control, to people that they will never meet, allows people to be much more, I guess, savage is the word I will use, in their dialogue on social media. We need to take a step back and, look at our local areas.
Right. Yeah, that's a good point. So what are the future politics for Bristol? What are you looking forward to with all that combined, all of your talents and everything that you have?
Yep.
Self-awareness and everything. What are you working on right now in your local government?
It's a great question. I think it has changed the tenor. And I literally just got a beautiful note from somebody today who said, hey, you're doing a great job, which as a local leader, I wouldn't have expected that either. Right. I'm expecting that people are going to be more critical of what I do all the time. But we have a unique history here in Bristol. We're a city, 60,000 people. We were one of the top manufacturing cities in the country in the early 20s, and had a great industrial base here. And we're still more of a middle class, blue collar industrial based city. But unfortunately, throughout the 60s and all the way through now, we started something called urban renewal. And this is before both your and my time, Tapasio. But we took down a lot of our beautiful buildings, and we literally have had either an empty or a nearly empty downtown for 63 years. Think about the drag that is on the generations. So we have 3 generations of people that haven't had a city center that they can call us a city. So we're a big, small town, and we always kind of will be a big, small town. But I am very proud that over the last 3 years, we've taken a new direction there. I focused, 80% of my energy on that. We're going to get the city to not own that property, the empty parking lots, but we're literally going to fill them, and we're going to give them to private developers, and we're going to look like some of the other cool cities and towns around us in Connecticut. Connecticut's a very wealthy state as well, too, and we're tight knit. So anybody older than me, and I will share my age, I'm in my mid 50s, but anybody older than me doesn't believe that we'll turn this around, because they've watched it for 3 generations. So my goal is to be a cheerleader and to hopefully we get some of those people back, because those are people that do want to come and recreate and walk into a livable, walkable downtown and go to restaurants, which we've really been lacking. And then I think the people younger than me are going to be very easy. They don't know much better, right? They haven't they haven't lived it for their whole lives, and they have a lot of life ahead of them, and they will come around. So in the last 3 years, we've had 4 or 5 major developments downtown. I get to look out right across from me right now and watch the streetscapes getting built, and we'll have restaurants being built. And the goal is to get somewhere in the neighborhood of 3,000 new people to Bristol living within this half-mile radius of downtown. And I think people are noticing it. They have to notice it, by the way, too. The street's a mess right now. You can't drive around downtown. And when they come to City Hall, which has just been refurbished as well, they're just noticing and feeling the difference. And that adds up over time. It really does. So I'm hoping that's going to be my legacy. We'll see what happens.
Well, that's really exciting. Congratulations. Hoping it comes to fruition. I'm sure it will. And with that, we're pretty much closing up on our time right now. If there's any last words you want to say, let us know for the CivilTalk users, anything about social emotional learning or civility. If you want to broadcast Bristol.
Yeah, certainly want to broadcast Bristol. I think we are, coming into our own, and I'm very proud of the fact that when you come to the city of Bristol, which is known as the All Heart City, that everybody will be appreciated. So, we are all about the diversity of a city. We're all about inclusivity and making sure that everybody has a voice. And I think my reminder to any other future budding politician is to be able to live your life. And by the way, this doesn't mean you can't become a politician at 20 years old, but have some life experiences. And if you do go into politics, make sure you have a lot of other kind of side gigs, I'll call them, right? Have outside entertainment. The other big problem I see in politics as kind of the last thing here is people take it so seriously and they become so single focused and their mind on it. That's just not healthy. Not healthy for you, but it's certainly not helpful for the political environment. We shouldn't be splitting up families over presidential candidates. And there's not anybody that's listening to this right now that's lived through the past 8 or 10 years that wouldn't admit that that's happened. They know somebody who doesn't talk to family members anymore. And get down to that local level, and I think you'll do a lot better because there's always that at least one degree, but probably not even a degree of separation for people that you know locally.
Yeah, that's well said. Thank you. I appreciate that.
No problem. Thanks for having me. This has been fun.
Thank you. Yes. For our listeners, if you enjoyed this episode, please be sure to subscribe, leave a review, and share it with your network. We want to keep this conversation going about the power of SEL and civility in all aspects of our lives. And as always, stay tuned for more inspiring inspiration and discussion on CivilTalk, where we explore how empathy and understanding can truly make a difference. Until next time, keep striving for civility and empathy in all that you do. Thank you, Jeff.
Thank you.